American Born Chinese by Jin Luen Yang is a graphic novel about finding identity. There are three main characters in this book: the Monkey King, Chinky, and Jin. They face a serious amount of adversities they will later try to overcome. This graphic novel explores Jin's physical and emotional changes throughout the book, which will later come up as adversities he will overcome with the help of his friends and his acceptance towards his Chinese heritage. American Born Chinese uses many written and graphic techniques to express a feeling of acceptance that Jin wanted to fit into his new American life. Wei Chen is a young boy from Taiwan who moved to Jin's school. Jin's relationship with Wei Chen develops more when he decides to accept his identity. This can be seen through stereotypes, metaphors, and facial expressions that Yang used. In page 36, Wei Chen just arrived to school for the first time. He looked a lot like Jin, and he thinks, "Something made me want to beat him up." These were Jin's first impressions of Wei Chen. Jin Luen Yang used metaphor in Wei Chen's character, which could be portrayed as Jin's Chinese side of himself, which he didn't want to show because he felt different than all his American classmates. Yang used stereotypes to make these two characters look familiar, because people use stereotypes a lot, especially if there are two kids that come from Asia, which makes Jin insecure and makes him feel judged by other people. On page 37, Wei Chen sees Jin sitting by himself and goes to him and talks to him. He says, "Sorry to bother you, but you're Chinese, aren't you?" And Jin replies with, "You're in America, speak English." Jin replied with anger. He didn't want to be seen with Wei Chen because he thought the other kids would make assumptions about him hanging out with another Asian kid, and that's the last thing he wanted. He felt different from the other kids and he sought approval from them. Therefore, he wanted to act as much as a typical American kid as possible, but Wei Chen reminded Jin of his Chinese side that he was ashamed of and he was trying to hide. Yang used graphical, written, and visual techniques to demonstrate how Wei Chen reminded Jin of his Chinese part of himself, which he didn't want to reveal in order for him to be accepted by his American classmates. Amelia is a typical American girl. She has blue eyes, blonde hair, she's white and very skinny. In American Born Chinese, Amelia can be seen as a metaphor as a representation of all Americans. On page 45, we're first introduced to Amelia. Jin immediately falls in love with her. This can be clear when he says, "Even though we'd been in the same school together since the 3rd grade, I never noticed Amelia Harris until one humid afternoon in Mr. Kayak's 7th grade English class." Amelia is a beautiful young girl with very typical American features, and Jin falls in love with her mainly because he realized how by dating an American girl can make him fit into the new environment he moved into, and it could make his classmates accept Jin once and for all. On page 63, Jin falls in love with Amelia and asks her out. Amelia says yes to the date. When Amelia agrees to go on a date with Jin, it could be interpreted as a way of being accepted by the American society. Jin has a lot of trouble fitting in with his classmates because he has a different heritage than them, but he felt approved by them when Amelia agreed to go out with him. In the book American Born Chinese, Amelia is basically a metaphor for the American society, and by Jin dating her, then he believes that he will be accepted by all the Americans, as he can now relate to one of them. Jin Luen Yang uses metaphors and graphic way into the final scene to show how Jin accepted his Chinese and Asian heritage. In the last scene, Jin and Wei Chen are in an Asian cafe and they're both drinking boba tea. Boba tea is a Taiwanese drink. Jin Luen Yang included this scene into the book because it represents Jin finally accepting his Asian side and his Chinese heritage. The boba tea is a metaphor to Asia and more specifically Jin's Chinese heritage. And because in this scene Jin is actually drinking the tea, the viewer can see how he's accepting his Chinese heritage. In this scene, the panels are different than the usual panels in a graphic novel. The first panel on this page is a large zoomed-in panel that has 2 boba teas on it, and the second panel is Wei Chen, and the third panel is Jin. Yang used the graphic way to show the viewer how these 2 different people can relate to each other. In this scene, Wei Chen and Jin look very different and they're both in separate panels. But both of their boba teas are in the same panel, which can mean that they connect with each other from their Asian heritage. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Jin Luen Yang used graphic and written techniques to show how Jin's acceptance of his Chinese heritage made him a better person and made him realize there is nothing wrong with his identity. In conclusion, Jin Luen Yang used different graphical and written techniques that affect Jin's life throughout the graphic novel, for him to later realize that he will never lose the Chinese heritage in him and he will have to accept that he's different from the rest.